cultivated in fragile ecosystems, forests, or even national parks, causing deforestation and biodiversity losses. According to the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime, in 2023 in Colombia, the forest reservation zones and national parks concentrated 18% of coca cultivation. In addition, as noted by the UN World Drug Report 2023, there is a growing evidence of indirect nexus between illicit drugs market in deforestation through so-called narco-deforestation, where drug revenues are reinvested in the activities as cattle ranching or agriculture, leading to the further forest loss. The report compiled evidence on the multiple impacts of drug-related crime, environmental crime, and convergent crime on nature and social systems in Amazon Basin. For the first time, the 66 CND in 2023 has adopted a resolution putting a strong emphasis on indigenous rights within the framework of sustainable and inclusive alternative development. It's a necessary step towards a more comprehensive approach to address the highly complex relationship between the drugs and other illicit economies that affect the environment and converging crimes that with a highly harmful social, political, and environmental impacts. This highlights the needs for comprehensive approaches at different levels of policy making and their future implementation. In this context, our panel today will discuss how to sustainably address the complex nexus between drug-related crime and other crimes that affect the environment. Together with our panelists, we will explore that sustainable policy response can be addressed in cooperation between different sectors and stakeholders. And to continue, I would like to introduce our four panelists who will bring the light and new policies response we will discuss today. Dr. Angela May, the Chief of the Research and Trend Analysis Branch at the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime. Barbara Souto, Coordinator of a Center for Studies on Drugs and Community Social Development of Brazil, CEDESC. CEDESC is a partnership between the National Secretariat of Drug Policies in Brazil, UNDC, and UNDP. Dr. Maritza Velasquez, Associate Professor of the University of the Andes, Bogota, in Colombia, and Juan Carlos Garzón, Consultant of the Open Society Foundation Drug Policy Opportunity and a Senior Researcher at the EGRP Institute and at Cytecrime. Before we start with our presentation, just short logistical notes that the participants of the panel are not able to switch their microphones or cameras. So please address all the questions under the Q&A chat or section in Zoom, and we'll try to answer your questions either in the chat or after the presentation. First, we would like to hear a recent and comprehensive data on the Amazon Basin from the UNDC and how it could influence policy work. So I will invite Angela and give the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anna, and well, good late afternoon from Vienna to everyone. Right, first of all, let me share the screen. So this is done. Okay. So what I wanted to discuss this afternoon is, as Anna, you put it well, the analysis that we have done in the 2023 World Drug Report that focused on the Amazon. We did a similar analysis for this year World Drug Report, but focusing on the Golden Triangle. And it's interesting to see as some of the results are the same and some a little bit different. But anyway, the story, as you mentioned it, Anna, is basically a story of the illicit drug economies fueling a range of other type of illicit markets that they have.
Angela, just a second. We cannot see your presentation.
You can't?
No, it's not visible.
Okay, it's in my, okay. So I will, okay, share.
Yes, now it's coming.
Okay, sorry. Now?
Now, yes, it's here.
Okay, apology. So that's what I was talking about when I was saying, what you mentioned is basically the visualization of what you mentioned, Anna, in relation to how in the Amazon, illicit drug economies have given the resources and the power of groups to actually go into other illicit markets, and particularly on markets that relate to wildlife crime or illicit deforestation, illegal mining. So all of this that really impact the environment. So how did you do? How did we do the research? So we do the research to feed into the 2023 World Drug Report, and really initially we want just to understand the impact of drugs into the environment, but then we realized that the issue was more complex. And that we also need to look at the impact into local communities, and then zooming in one very specific areas, and then for last year was the Amazon, because is the richest ecosystem in the world, and so in a way the impact is even more exacerbated because of the diversity that there is in the Amazon. How did we do this? Well, we had some qualitative research with interviewing very key law enforcement, key informants, prosecutors, but also just more from the law enforcement side and criminal justice, but also from civil society. And then, of course, we did all an analysis of open and scientific literature. We looked at, of course, we have done a lot also of our research in the area. And then we also, I'll show you some geospatial analysis, because we really wanted to have that focus to see how actually the convergence happens geographically. So the context of the Amazon. The Amazon is really as it is a natural and largely diverse biodiversity system, has also a very quite advanced, developed and interconnected drug trafficking groups. And here is just to have an idea, and the different colors are different groups. And just to give an idea on, the number of groups involved, more to Colombia, but still. And some of these groups are really international and are expanding very fast, also beyond the Amazon, but beyond the Americas. And so, but then, so there is that constellation that makes, again, there are in a way the human resources available to make the drug trafficking and other illicit markets quite harmful. And here is just to focus on the drug side. As many know, the region is really affected by large cocaine trafficking, but also cannabis trafficking. Here you see in different colors, so the brown is cocaine and the green is cannabis. From the different countries that we covered with this analysis, the large trafficking routes. These are seizures, and we all know about the limitation of seizures, etc. But this, are really established routes that we have been seeing also when we analyze and triangulate information beyond seizures. But I think this just visualize the type of intensity and how important is also the region as a source for drugs. And making it also in terms of drugs, we have just released our data for Colombia. And you see here, again, still increasing cultivation and production, 10% increase on cultivation and 53% of increase in production. And so again, the last few years, we are saying reaching record high of production. And what is really making the constellation of activities countries, when we saw the groups before, is that the production is also becoming more intensive. And you see here why the production was higher in terms of increased rate than cultivation, because groups are becoming more and more efficient. And so cocaine cultivation is moving from, is becoming less and less in areas where there are more farmers or small farmers selling, cultivating and selling coca, toward the more really groups domain on the cultivation. And so it becomes much more efficient, almost, I would say, in industrialized level. And also much more concentrated. So instead of being spread, it's concentrated, but in that area, there's a lot of resources that groups are putting to really maximize the profit. Now, so when we discuss about the, when we look at the environmental impact of the illicit cultivation, it's clear that illicit cultivation, particularly of coca, it's clear that the big illicit deforestation that we see in the Amazon is not related to coca cultivation. There is a little bit, but where is most important actually is the indirect impact of cultivation. And this here, to see this kind of vicious cycle, is to give an idea of that kind of indirect impact that drug cultivation has. Basically, is giving the resources to groups to then go into different other markets, and then to become, again, reinforcing the groups, domain governance, local governance, but also the resources to be able again to reinforce this. So the environmental impact of the drug cultivation, of the drug economies, is more indirect, but very strong. Now, what the Amazon is a very large area, and but where we see this all coming together is what we say like hotspots of convergence. So there are certain areas where we see that all of these issues are all converging, and one is, as Anna, you mentioned it for Colombia, is true also for Bolivia. That and here is the example of that, where you see the square, where basically most also the increase and the cultivation is happening in the protected areas. So even if the cultivation itself does not produce the large deforestation that affect the Amazon, coca cultivation is affecting definitely protected areas. And here it's just a hotspot to show these hotspots where we were able to document this convergence. Here is an example of where you see that the plains these are illegal landing strips. Then you see the circle, the red circles is the rate of violence against human rights defenders, environmental defenders, and then you see those pink kind of stuff that is illegal deforestation. So you see there that basically, there are areas where basically groups are dominating, and where all of these issues are really converging, and where so that it's clear how groups are really involved in a number of areas that impact. This is another example more linked to Colombia, again, where you see cultivation of coca, we see the killing of human rights defender, and deforestation. And again, you see where certain spots, you see this all convergence. So you see where basically the violence is mostly also relating to the communities that fight back on this illicit governance and this pressure of groups to really taking away basically the natural resources. And so it is an issue of convergence of criminal activities that really have a great impact on environment in general, because here we have the deforestation, wildlife, trafficking, but also violence. So, and you know, in both, in two of the slides, I show how where there is this concentration of illegal markets, there is also concentration of violence, and mainly, as I mentioned, mainly of human rights defenders, of environmental defenders. So again, it's like the communities are pushing back. And the indigenous communities. Some of these areas that I show you are really areas where the indigenous community, dominated by indigenous communities. And so again, where, you know, the environmental resources are so important. So to conclude, so from out of this research, what do we take? Is that clearly this convergence and these linkages really shows how you know, drug policy in isolation doesn't really work, because we are at the stage where these dynamics are all interconnected, and so need to think how to you know, putting together and thinking in terms of drug policy and environmental protection policy, and also how to structure the environmental crime responses together with the drug related responses. But also to have a very local and community-based policy that are needed territorial, because there is a clear, you know, very concentrated territorial challenges. But also the importance of targeting in terms of, again, environmental crimes, but also drug trafficking. I'm looking at the ecosystem and not single event. So clearly, with this constellation, single seizures or you know, arrest of you know, criminal actors here and there, but really the need to see a much more analytical and comprehensive responses, and also to focus on nodes, on where all of this also convergence happens. That could be more territorial, but also where the trafficking is leaving the Amazon, so particularly on ports. But also the need, again, to monitor the markets. And so here we are talking about when we need to, you know, not just the drug market, but also together with the overall environmental crime markets. And then clearly, you know, there is an issue of interconnectedness across countries. So really the response cannot come only from one country, otherwise it would be just not sustainable. So with this, I leave you and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Angela. Thank you for bringing once again all evidence together and highlighting the importance of comprehensive research and also comprehensive policies, and also how do we see the complex impact that drug economy brings not only to the environment, but also, as you mentioned, to the human rights, to the violence, and to the communities. And now we will proceed and we'll go maybe a bit more specifically to the areas of Brazil with the presentation from Bárbara Souto, who would provide us more insights into the recent findings from on the cross-cutting issues of drug trafficking in Amazons, and what could be done to build this intersectional action that could help strengthen the communities in Amazon. So please, Bárbara, the floor is yours now.
Thank you, Hannah. It's a pleasure to join you all today. I would like to thank you, and I will share my screen now. Okay, are you? Okay.
Yes, we can see your slides.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'm going to present some studies carried out by the Center for Studies on Drugs and Community Social Development in Brazil, as Hannah mentioned, And following on from the overview presented by Angela, I'm going to focus in some data and information from Brazil. To provide context, the center is a partnership between the Secretariat for Drug Policy of the Brazilian Ministry of Justice and Public Security, the UNODC and UNDP in Brazil. And the center was created to support Senad's policies, the National Secretariat policies, and focuses on promoting innovative and inclusive drug policy, and supported by the expertise of UNODC. Activities includes the production of research, data analysis, and the technical support on public policies, focusing on local communities affected by drug trafficking or drug-related issues. Well, I will start mentioning that this area of study at the center was started based on the UNHCR drug report presented now by Angela, and with the objective of continuing the analysis. In 2023, the center published a report on drug trafficking in the Brazilian Amazon region, and now in this year we expanded our focus to analyze the convergence between drug trafficking and other illegal activities contributing to deforestation in the region. A preliminary version of this study is available, but the final report with more analysis will be available soon. The convergence of crimes in the Amazon is an emerging area of study for various countries and institutions. In Brazil, for instance, there are studies with historical homicide data showing a rise in violence in Amazonian cities, reports showing the expansion of new criminal groups in the region, and UNHCR office in Brazil has also conducted significant studies on illegal mining in the state of Pará and the prevalence of slave labor in the context of these illicit activities. Just to give you an overview and to understand the vast scale of the Amazon in Brazil and the challenge it presents, here are some key figures. Approximately 60% of the Amazon rainforest lies within Brazil, covering nearly 2/3 of the country's territory. This immense region, it's not only a critical carbon sink, but also a home for a rich ecosystem and a unique biodiversity, as everyone knows. And the map of this slide is showing the difference between the Amazon biome and the legal Amazon. It's very important to explain this difference because for Brazil, the Amazon biome is a large area that you can see in this map in green. This area is known for its tropical forests, man rivers, diverse wildlife, and it covers about 48% of Brazil's territory. And the legal Amazon includes the entire Amazon biome and extends across 9 Brazilian states, representing about 59% of the country's territory, as you can see in the map and indicated in this slide. And the legal Amazon was established by the Brazilian government to define the geographic boundaries for political region and to plan and to implement public policies and services in the region. So it's very interesting to know this difference, to understand where data and information comes from. And an overview on the population living in the Brazilian Amazon region. In 2022, approximately 28 million people lived in the Amazon. This area is where the most of Brazil's indigenous populations live. There are 180 different groups represented in this region. In addition, around 46% of the total population of the Amazon lives in poverty. Just to give you an idea of what we are talking about poverty, people surviving on less than €6 a day. On the map, you can see the cities with the highest concentrations of indigenous people, including the triple border region of Tabatinga, which connects with Peru and Colombia, which connects Brazil with Peru and Colombia. Yes, and here is the first center study which focused on identifying the main dynamics of drug trafficking operating in the Amazon region. The methodology used data on drug trafficking and interviews with various professionals working in the region. As you know, Brazil is considered a transit and consumption country for drugs and an important hub for international trafficking. And some of the main results of this study are the rivers in the Amazon region are increasingly being used as a means of transportation for drug trafficking. Drug traffickers are using the same infrastructure as illegal mining and other illegal activities, landing, airstrips, and internet communication. This has also been identified in intelligence investigations by federal police in Brazil, which they identified money laundering, for example, in the context of illegal mining and drug trafficking in joint activities in the Amazon region. Here you can see some of the main roads along the rivers in the region, with the Solimões River in the state of Amazonas as the main entry point for drugs into the state of Amazonas. The green line indicates the cannabis roads and the blue cocaine roads. The drug circulates mainly into the state of Pará, where it starts to be distributed for internal or international trafficking, exported through Brazilian ports, such as in the north or the northeast or other regions as well. Here, this map shows the main individual seizures of cannabis and skunk in the region in 2022. Cannabis is indicated by green and skunk by brown. For skunk, the largest seizures are found in the main river basin of the region along the river roads, which are mainly from Colombia. And common cannabis has more widespread seizures in the region. And the same analysis, but now for cocaine. Coca paste is represented by brown and hydrochloride in blue. The main focus of cocaine seizures in hydrochloride form is on the border with Bolivia, as you can see. And in addition, important seizures in Pará. It's a very strategic state for drug-related activities in Amazon region. I will show more analysis about this state in the next slides. And here, we also analyzed the cocaine seizures on Brazil's federal highways and found that of the top 10 highways in terms of cocaine seizures, 7 are in the Amazon. We identified that the amount of cocaine and its derivatives seized in Brazil's Amazonian states is much higher than the national average, demonstrating that this is an important route for drugs to enter Brazil and to be transported to other regions and countries, and to indicate there is some of dynamics of drug trafficking in the Amazon region. And now the second study of this year focused on analyzing the links between drugs and environmental degradation, and following the other studies that have been carried out to understand this possible link. For this work, it was carried out a work on examining and crossing data on drug seizures, deforestation, and the use of airstrips in the Brazilian Amazon. Secondary data from different institutions as used as indicated on the slide. And among its key findings, it was noted that the convergence of illicit activities has led to an increase in deforestation in the region, and this has also increased the pressure upon indigenous territories, local communities, as I will present in the next slides. Well, here, as an example of the efforts to put this data from different illicit activities and analyze them in a more integrated way, I present the case of the state of Pará that I have mentioned before, in which we analyze data on deforestation, airstrips, and drug trafficking in the years of 22 and 23. And there is a lot of highest incidence of these activities in the state of Pará, and the convergence between drug trafficking and environmental crimes or other illicit activities is demonstrated by this growing convergence of various criminal activities, including drug trafficking, illegal logging, mining, wildlife trafficking within this region. And as Angela, Hannah, and mentioned, the criminal groups operating in this region share the same infrastructure to maximize their profits and increase their business. To zooming into data from 23, here you can see the municipalities of the state of Pará in Brazil and the main rivers. The purple indicates the regions with the most cocaine seizures, and the red dots on the map represent deforestation. The light orange areas show indigenous territories. The black plains indicate legal airstrips, and the white, the illegal airstrips. So there is a lot of illegal airstrips, a lot of points of deforestation, and as you can see, the indigenous territories are like surrounded by these illicit activities. Well, Pará is the second state in the legal Amazon with the highest number of illegal airstrips and the highest incidence of illegal mining activities in the country. Drug seizures are more frequent in urban areas, here in purple, but in some forest areas, more remote areas, is more difficult to monitor. But it's important to mention that the state of Pará has high numbers of drug seizures in the region, and is considered an important hub as well. Well, about the means of transport, Pará has a good infrastructure, and it is being used by the criminal groups to facilitate the dynamics of the illicit market. And although specific data on indigenous populations are not detailed here, the general patterns of increased drug trafficking and deforestation in Pará affects indigenous territories, particularly through infrastructure developments like landing strips, environmental degradation. Indigenous territories are surrounded by illegal activities, and this has also increased the pressure on these territories, posing various threats to the local governance, the indigenous territory, their culture, and so on. This map on the Brazilian Amazon region reveals that the states that presented an increase in the seizure of cannabis or cocaine also had a reduction in deforestation between the years of 22-23. Although it's not possible to establish a direct relationship link between these phenomena yet, but we consider important to think about them in an integrated way, and the need to monitor and complement these analyses with more data and information from other areas. And about the analysis of vegetation loss in Brazil, data indicates that Brazil lost 33% of its native vegetation in the last 3 decades, but only 1% of the original forest was lost on indigenous land. So it's very relevant information that highlights the relevance of indigenous people as protectors of the environment. And we have also data on Brazil showing that the human rights defenders defenders of the environment in Brazil are being very in a situation very dangerous and with a high incidence of homicides in this region and in the states of Amazonas and Pará. Well, as possible next steps, I would like to share a few comments and to share a little of what we are doing here in Brazil. The research carried out and the knowledge that has been generated by different institutions has been very, very important in strengthening actions that are based on evidence and focused on the need of the region and population living there. So the continuity of these studies and analyses are very important. And I share a strategy designed and implemented by the National Secretariat for Drug Policy in Brazil, that it was established a national strategy for indigenous peoples in drug policy, recognizing the growing impact that drug-related activities have had on indigenous territories and the environment. And as a result of this national strategy, for example, it will be launched the Assent for Access to Rights and Social Inclusion drug policy in the state of Amazonas in Brazil in the next month, at December, not November. I'm already in November, focusing on the promotion of access to services, justice, protection, social development activities for indigenous people, focusing on reach this population. And here, this image for putting together these three main acts to indicate that we are looking for different areas and trying to analyze it together. So the center has supported SENAT, the National Secretariat in Brazil, in carrying out local diagnostics to identify the regions and the groups most affected by drug trafficking for priority actions in drug policy. And the idea is to hear these populations in addition to the data and information collected. So the Secretariat has led several consultations with indigenous people, some pictures here, that we have participated in to ensure that their needs and ideas are incorporated into these diagnostics, prioritizing participatory construction of activities and projects, and thinking that it's a very important way to ensure the sustainability of activities, to involve local communities and their needs, their voices in the activities. So
Thank you, Barbara.
And yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for bringing us a bit closer to specific situation on the ground in Brazil, and to showing your very profound research and how further it could be used for the policy development. And now I would like to give the floor to Dr. Mauricio Velasquez, who will continue maybe with more zooming in information, specifically on his research on the complex relationship between legal and illegal economies in Amazon. Please, Mauricio.
Thank you, Hannah. Can you hear me all? Okay, great. So I'm gonna present here what amounts to like a year-long research in the field. It's been led by Maria Alejandra Vélez, who unfortunately cannot be here, myself, Beatriz Ramos, and Estefania. And what I'd like to present to you is this changing panorama of interactions between cocaine, gold mining, and cattle ranching economies in the Colombian Amazon. So definitely, I think I'll be focusing, zooming in into Colombia, but the previous presentations are really, really useful to like frame what I want to present. So what we have been doing is doing some field work, talking to communities, to social leaders, to politicians, to people engaged in enforcement in these three places, Vista Hermosa, Puerto Guzman, and Tumaco. As you can see from the UNODC report that is just being released, and Angela was talking about it, these are places that are very close to what she was talking about, the concentration of coca production and these emerging industrialization in the coca economy. So it wasn't exactly in the concentrated areas, but very close by to sort of like see some of the effects that this is having in terms of conflict and in terms of like labor, land, etc. So what I'd like to do with this presentation is to talk about changes in conflict that we've been seeing since 2016, especially with the peace agreement and the transition that FARC did back then, changes in the economy. And I'd like to talk about specific changes in these three economies and how there is like a separation between the cocaine economy and the coca economy right now. And I'd like to present a model of interaction that we've been working on before I just talk about some policy recommendations. So the first insight that I think is important to understand what's been going on is this transition into the transition that the FARC as the main armed and rebel group had throughout the Colombian history. So you can think of FARC as a peasant guerrilla movement from the 60s up to the early 80s that was, heavily influenced by ideology and our perspective on the extreme left, but definitely politics was very key to the group. And then as it started growing, like very rapidly in the late 80s and early 90s, FARC got like enmeshed or combining ideology and narco traffic. And as it grew way more up to the 2000s, you started to see how the FARC's ideology component was decreasing in comparison to the narco traffic importance in the group. Now, how I understand the peace agreement with FARC as a delinking of these two aspects completely. So you had a political party that was formed that basically took all these ideological component, and the dissidents or the remaining groups from FARC basically were led exclusively by people that were professional or were running basically the cocaine businesses in the FARC. So a way to put this, for example, let me see if I can reduce here so that I can read it all. So there was definitely a transition in which the dissidents that remained had the know-how of this cocaine system. Dissidents of the FARC EP members leverage cocaine knowledge for military expansion, and that's what we've been seeing since 2016. The political aspect was lost, but it also means that it lost the capacity to project a political project across the territory. And so what we are seeing is a transition towards a more military and economic approach as opposed to a political project. Expertise sustains or expands coca operations in conflict regions, and there is a lot of factionalism between these groups that remain from that. So in the places where we've been doing this research, for example, commanders as Calarca or Ivan Mordisco, they were the people managing coca-based base trade in the FARC, or they control coca production In Nariño, Jason Segura managed drug trade in the Southwest, and so on and so forth. The same in Putumayo, where some of these commanders were actually key players in coca cultivation and trade, when not just being part of the self-defense forces, which were very much connected to this. So that's one part, the transition of these groups from being political and driven by political and economic motives to basically being professionals in the cocaine trade. The second change that has been going on in Colombia is what has to do with peace building and peace implementation. So the promise of the peace agreement was to have a rural reform, which has been very insufficiently implemented, and to have a transition for drug cultivation and coca cultivation, especially driven by peasants. And it's been poorly delivered. Environmental damage connected to the program itself, it's been really large. So in places where this program has been implemented, deforestation has skyrocketed, which implies and also from interviews that as people replace coca through these programs, they've been moving into cattle ranching, which has skyrocketed throughout the Amazon region. The peace agreement has been poorly implemented, and there has been rather striking erosion of trust in state forces. So, for example, people tend to connect the fact that the cocaine trade is decreasing, or that the money that they are receiving for coca is decreasing. They connect it, strangely enough, with what they say is changes that the Petro government has been conducting in the military forces, as to imply that the military forces were actually the ones like promoting all these routes and facilitating trading in cocaine. And there has been rising violence, and the influence of these groups have increased. And I just point out here that Total Peace, as the main program for conducting these new peace agreements with these groups, have been criticized for enabling armed groups to consolidate territorial control, including by mixing this idea of peace and the environmental agenda, as if they could be like forest guardians in the context of these peace agreements. So that's the second change. And the third, and the other set of changes that I wanted to transmit here is, first, changes in the coca economy. So with FARC-EP demobilization in 2016, the coca and cocaine economy is undergoing a process of reconfiguration, as we've seen throughout these presentations. This process exceeded significant regional variations. There are larger agro-industrial production models emerging, probably to maximize production, but also as a way to maximize what they currently have as the military capacity that they can now carry. That is, FARC could control vast areas of the territory and basically control the peasants cultivating the coca. These groups are operating in a highly fragmented territory, and probably this concentration of the coca economy is led by these concerns about what they can actually control. There has been a crisis of the money paid to peasants cultivating coca, but it hasn't been a problem for the rest of the economy. So the demand for cocaine remains stable, or even it has shown some upward trends, and cocaine production has skyrocketed, as we saw. Then gold is experiencing a boom in the world economy. So whereas before we had gold in these upper parts of the maps that you can see there and towards the Pacific, now the Amazon is growing, in the presence of gold mining is growing. And so now it looks like very small down there, down close to Ecuador and Peru, but this is really growing. And that's the area where we've been conducting this research. So mining activity is increasing in these areas. There is more autonomous and medium scale mechanized mining methods that have diminished, and the activity has started attracting outsiders. So locals are playing a lesser role as opposed to people coming from outside with bigger machinery to make these exploitations. And the regulation of this activity by armed groups seems to resemble the control previously exercised by FARC-EP over coca and cocaine. So we have some ideas that maybe the mining, by knowing how the FARC used to regulate the coca economy, these groups are trying to use that technology to control the mining activity, at least in Putumayo. And the part that I think is very important is that there is an active opposition to state regulation of mining practices and and there is a general perception of an unfair treatment. So the legitimacy of the state to regulate the gold mining industries is pretty low. Sorry, how many minutes do I have?
7 minutes.
Good. So then there is the cattle, what we can describe as a cattle ranching boom throughout the Colombian Amazon. So growth in cattle population increased by 32% from 23 million to 29 million in about 7 years. The number of farms went from about 500,000 to 650,000 in just 4 years. And large farms also grew by about 40% in these few years. Now, the interesting part about cattle ranching is that there is an active opposition to government and civil society initiatives to oversee the production chain. That is, it's very hard for the government to know where these cows are, how they are interacting with deforestation, and how you can actually enforce the regulations that are there in the cattle ranching economy. So this leads me to the final point that I wanted to make. There seems to be emerging an interaction between these economies that I think benefit from all these changes that I've been describing. So first, you have the coca economy is facing a crisis in demand, and there is a crisis in the implementation of the peace agreement. So there is a crisis of legitimacy about like what the government can do with the coca economy. Then the gold economy is very informal. There is a boom in the gold exploitation industry. And there is also a legitimacy crisis because the miners and the artisanal miners, they reject the way which the government have been trying to regulate these economies. And then there is a boom in meat demand across the world. We are increasingly exporting meat to markets as China, for example, and there is an active opposition to regulation by the state. So we have many challenges in regulating, overseeing, and implementing policies in these three markets. And this is precisely where these groups are having an opportunity to transform these, especially these informal markets of gold and these informal markets of cattle into gray markets, which they really are a combination between legal and illegal activities for criminal purposes, basically. So what we are seeing is these groups using this concentration industrialized capacity to produce cocaine, the know-how of the cocaine industry, and their military resources to try to expand basically by investing or through money laundering in these other three markets as a way to regulate the territories in which they are penetrating. It's as if they are transitioning from thinking about coca as the territory towards money laundering and investment in these other, like diversifying their economies as a way to gain the territorial control. So there is diversification, there is cooptation, there is an anti-state convergence between cattle ranchers, miners, and these groups, which is of course not what everybody wants, but they are seeing this opportunity opening up to put their money in places where the state is very unable to regulate and oversee. So this leads me to the final point, which is challenges in interdiction, because as the government tries to attack these chains, being either the cocaine market directly or the coca production, or as the state tries to, for example, blow up machinery in the gold mines, or it tries to confiscate cattle that is produced in all these areas, there is like a social convergence to oppose state action because of these gray market dynamics. So in terms of recommendations, and this is the final part, so we say always implement the peace agreement, prioritize full implementation of the comprehensive program for substitution of illicit crops and the rural reform. Without that, there is very limited action that the government can take at this point, I think. Then realize that the speedways of criminal activity for these gray markets are the rivers, and our infantry for rivers is very limited in its capacity. So we need to have a revolution in the capacity of the military to control the rivers in the Amazon. We need to strengthen oversight across sectors. We need to expand traceability of cattle ranching and mining to clearly differentiate legal from gray markets and reduce illicit infiltration. It's very hard to do, but it must be done. Engage communities in sustainable development, bolsters justice mechanisms. We are prioritizing military interventions over prosecution and investigative capacity of the state. We need to strengthen the capacity of the Attorney General to reach these places. Protect social and environmental leaders. And one final point here, the government needs to align, but it needs to separate environmental and conflict resolution goals. As Total Peace is currently run by the Petro government, in the peace negotiation, there is this question about how these rebel groups can help in protecting the forest. And they've been using this as a way to send a signal to the government that if the negotiations are going well, they are stopping deforestation. If they are going badly, they are increasing the rate of deforestation. And that is effectively giving them capacity to control territory. And so you must align these agendas, but you cannot make them the same. You cannot make this dangerous convergence between these agendas. And I'll leave there because I think my time is up.
Thank you very much, Mauricio. Thank you for showing us a very constellation of how illicit drug economies are connected to the political and social infrastructure in the regions. And I would like to give a floor now to our last but not least panelist, Juan Carlos Garzón, who will present the recent report of Coppolat study on Latin America and Caribbeans, the silent destruction. Please, Carlos, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Hannah. Please let me know when I have 2 minutes left, please.
Okay,
And I'm going to share the presentation. Okay, so today I'm going to divide my presentation into parts. The first thing, I'm going to share with you some insights of a recent report that we published with Coppolat. Coppolat is the cooperation program between Latin America and the European Union on drug policies. And in the second part, last week I was in the COP16 in Cali. So if I have the time, I would like to share with you some inputs for the discussion. So we published this report like 2 weeks ago. And the goal of the report is to identify and analyze the impacts, the environmental impacts linked to the production and trafficking of illicit drugs, but also to the intervention of the state. So this report complements the work done by UNODC. Angela already talked about this. So what is the contribution of this document? So we try to provide a systematic perspective that analyzes and proposes possible alternatives to avoid, reduce, or compensate for environmental impacts. The focus is on Latin America. So we include the risk and impacts of the state responses. So in terms of the systemic perspective, what is to think more systematically. So usually we identify the events, for example, deforestation. So what is happening in deforestation? But we need to also to identify the patterns of behavior. For example, the establishment of illicit crops and illegal occupation of land. And also think on the system structures, no? What is behind? How are the parts related? So we need to think in economic processes that respond to demand, which encourage production. This is cocaine, but also gold, for example. The displacement of illicit crops in response to control measures, and also the weak capacity of the state. So, and behind that, the mental models. What are the values, the assumptions? And this is about our relationship with nature and the planet, but also our relationship with drugs. No? So this is our framework. So the starting point is the existence of a dynamic legal market moved by economic incentives and growing national and international demand. So we identify 4 domains. First, the direct impacts related to production and trafficking of illegal drugs. The second domain is the impacts of state responses. The third one is the impacts of convergence, the relationship between drugs and other illegal economies, and also the impacts of money laundering. So I think one of the tasks is try to put the pieces together because most of the time the impacts of illegal drug trafficking and production are in the center of the discussion, but the puzzle is more complex. So we already talked about convergence, no, the relationship between drug trafficking and environmental crimes, illegal wood, wildlife trafficking, illegal mining, and also we need to think in the territorial control and violence of criminal networks. Mauricio shared with us an excellent presentation about this, what is happening in the Amazon actually. So the impact on environmental activists with violence and coercion, the erosion of conservation governance in the Amazon, and also the impacts in this case in the indigenous communities. And we need to think also in the money laundering, no? So the profits from drug trafficking are used and reinvested, amplifying the negative effects with practices such land grabbing, extensive livestock farming, and large-scale crops. So profits from drug trafficking are put into the legal financial system and then used to develop extractive activities. But if we want to have like the complete story, we must also talk about what the state are doing, no? So this is an important piece. There is enough evidence to talk about the impacts, for example, of aerial spraying with glyphosate. I'm sure that this is a good pronunciation, but you can understand. And also the impacts of forced eradication of coca crops. No, the balloon effect, that the displacement of coca crops to new environmental sensitive frontiers that cause deforestation. We need also include the destruction of laboratories and chemical precursors in environmental fragile areas. No, the vast majority of seizures that occur in remote places, and the incineration is the most common practice in those areas. But I would like to talk about, especially about the unintended environmental consequences of alternative development. No, because a recent report published by UNODC states that alternative development itself has an impact of the environment that, if not managed well, could be greater than the environmental impact of illicit crops it is trying to address. So how? The first thing is the promotion of extensive crops and livestock stocks and as an economic alternative in environmental sensitive areas. Projects linked to coffee, cocoa, cattle. The second is the displacement and increase in illicit crops in areas surrounding where the developed alternative is implemented. The said published a recent report about this with the PENIS, the substitution program related to the peace process and the effect in terms of the displacement, and also the maintaining agricultural practices that may have consequences of the environment. So let me give you an example about this legal economic transition. No, this is what happened in the department of Guaviare in Colombia. So you can see the green figure, the green graphic is coca, no, and you can compare 2002 with 2022, and the other one, the blue bar, is the number of cows, no. So we need to consider in environmental terms that we can replace one problem with another, no? Especially if we do so in a disorganized and unsustainable way. So let me put the pieces together. So this is the direct impacts related to drug trafficking and drug production. Is relatively small, but we need to add convergence and organized crime, also money laundering and legal economies. So the consequences are amplified with this interaction, and also the state, no? So the impacts increase when considering every piece, no, in this puzzle. This is the complete story about what happened in the Amazon, for example. So we can talk about the opportunities. There are many opportunities, I think so. There are many things to do. The first one, obviously, is improve the information, no, expand monitoring and deepen knowledge. We need to work from convergence, recognizing the connection, not like just the drug policy discussion or debate, but we need to connect this discussion with other illegal economies and social issues in the Amazon. We need to recognize and disrupt illicit flows, no? An important recommendation is the protection of environmental defenders and the indigenous territories and Afro communities. All the evidence, if you compare what happened in the indigenous territories with any other kind of area, you can find that the deforestation in the indigenous territories is low, no? It's lower if you compare these two things. We need to think in green drug policies that recognize and preventing the collateral effects of the policies, and also include development initiatives to protect and restore the environment. There are many opportunities in terms of the alternative development oriented to the protection of the environment. For example, forest conservation, carbon credit, payments for environmental services. And obviously, I want to talk about, or I want to include the regulation option, no? And if we can think on a kind of a regulation that is connected with environmental standards as a part of the debate. So, Hannah?
I think I think we have to wrapping up.
Okay.
Because we have 2 minutes left, and maybe we could still address.
Okay, so let me jump to COP16. No, and I think what I felt that is that this discussion is the elephant in the room. No, in many places. I can recognize that now we have more discussion, but I think that is not enough. So what I saw is that there is a significant knowledge gap between the protection of the environment and the biodiversity agenda. No, this huge conversation about money, resources for the Amazon, and the security conditions. No, the second thing is that many governments, businesses, and advocacy groups focus on just one part of the complex problem, no? So the third thing is that actually governance is being lost in the Amazon with the growing influence of organized crime. And legal economy alternatives and state interventions are being exploited by organized crime. So through extortion, through cooptation, so we can develop different projects now in the Amazon, but we need to take into account this complex situation. So the question is, if we are approaching a point of no return in terms of loss of governance in the Amazon. So the final slide, I don't know if I have time.
No.
That's it?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Yes, I think we are very strict here with the time, but thank you very much to all the panelists and your outstanding work. And thank you very much for all the participants. Yeah, unfortunately, we have to finish our session. But once again, I think our panel underscored the strong interest that this topic is needed. Thank you very much, everyone, for participating, and have a good evening.